Amen. Well, I'm not sure how your morning was, but mine was a pretty rough morning because I was trying to get ready for service, and man, I had one job in the morning. Well, not exactly a job, just one task, and I really wanted to make tea. And as I was getting ready, I took the kettle with water and I placed it on the stove. And as I placed it on the stove, I forgot to put the whistle. You know how the kettle has a whistle on it? So when the water boils, it kind of lets you know. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't put the whistle down. So I just kind of went around trying to get all the other stuff done. And then I started smelling this kind of intense burning. And then I walked to the stove, and the kettle is like almost red, glowing. Turns out the 1 cup of water that I put in the kettle already boiled over, and the kettle just was heating up. Well, I turned off the stove, took the kettle, put it in the sink, and I tried to cool it down as much as I could. But you know, the kettle is made out of stainless steel, and now was a very, very, very dark yellow and burnt stainless steel. So, you know, I was looking at that. I'm like, I had one job, one task. Usually, you know, I wake up really early, so I don't have time to make tea, but I was so looking forward to this because, you know, somehow I messed it up. And then driving here, my roommate sent me a Snapchat, and he kind of showed our whole living room and says, it's really messy. What happened to what happened to this house? Because the house was kind of messy. To which I replied, oh yeah, and by the way, I burned the kettle. He didn't reply back, so I'm not sure what's gonna happen. But it is this kettle. But you know what, to me it's interesting how the very small, I had one small task, and somehow I still messed it up. I mean, this is not, you know, rocket science to boil some tea. And growing up, I had that in me constantly, where I would mess up on the little things. And I mean, I'm not even talking about the big things in life. And I can see it. If you want to see human nature in its purest form, watch your kids. Because I would be that kid that always got in trouble for the wrong reasons. And then when I grew up and I was about 15 years old, my sister had a daughter, and they lived at our house, so I kind of spent a lot of time just kind of babysitting her. And when she was about 4 or 5 years old, a lot of my friends were playing in the streets, and my mom and my dad, they were in the business of beekeeping, and we had a lot of honey. So when the harvest of honey was kind of like when we had the harvest of honey, my mom would take usually a plate and put a whole bunch of like honey mixed with like beeswax, and we ate that. It was good. If you never ate that, I'm sorry, but like we ate that, and my mom gave me the plate to go to the street and give it to these kids. So my niece came along, and she's like, I want to do it. And I'm like, okay, well, because I'm thinking, okay, the plate is ceramic, and I don't think this is gonna end well. So she's like, no, but I want to do it. And I'm like, well, how about I hold one side and you hold one side? She's like, no, I got it. And I'm like, are you sure you got it? And he's like, yeah, I got it, I can do it. You know how kids, they always want to do it themselves? Just kind of like, no, I got this. And the moment I'm like, okay, all right, you got this. The moment I turn around, I can hear like the smash of the plate on the concrete, right? And then I hear my mom, Slavik, what happened? And I'm like, and then I turn around and she looks at me, and on her face is the look of like the world is over, you know, like, and she starts screaming and yelling, and she's so upset. And I'm like, no, you're the one who broke the plate. Like, you're not gonna get me in trouble for breaking the plate. And then my mom was like, why is she crying? What'd you do? And I'm like, that's not my fault. Like, trying to explain myself. And I think a lot of times when we get in these kind of situations, and I think maybe this morning I'm talking about little petty stuff like burning the kettle, or you know, dropping a plate on the ground. But I think when it comes in bigger things in life, it has a tendency to make you feel like you're a failure. if you fail at one thing, like you had one job to make sure that honey gets to the street without actually plate breaking, and you messed it up. But then we get in situations that are a lot more complicated, like a relationship that broke up and you've messed up in a big way. It has a tendency to kind of become your doctrine. Well, I'm just good for nothing and it's just the story of my life. And you have a tendency to get negative. And this morning, I want to tell you that no matter what kind of situation you find yourself in, there's hope. And you know how I know that there's hope? Because I know there's people that have been in worse situations before. And they actually messed up way worse than we did. Think of Adam and Eve, for example. Adam, you had, and Eve, you had one job, and that is not to break humanity. Just one job. And your job didn't even entail for you to do anything. Your job was to stay away from something. Namely, stay away from that tree that God said that the day you eat out of it, you will die. Can you put yourself in his shoes, in their shoes? Can you think with me for a second here? What would it feel like to know that you broke humanity? Thanks, Adam. Well, because of what you've done, there will be a lot of broken homes, a lot of broken lives, a lot of kids starving to death, a lot of HIV, AIDS, and a lot of dysfunction and rape and murder. Thanks, Adam. That was great. Not. You had one job. Do you feel that he maybe felt a bit guilty? We know he felt ashamed. Because you see, in Genesis 3, it shows that the first thing they did is they came to this place where God said, don't even argue, don't even talk to the enemy that's on the tree. Don't even get close to it. Don't touch it. Don't do any of that. Well, they got really close. And they got so close, in fact, that they saw that the fruit was good. And they wanted to partake of it. Now, my question would be this, as Eve and Adam, if you saw through the corridor of time of all the brokenness, this one bite, or these two bites rather, like would actually would you still do it? Would you still do it? Like, if you know that the sin in your life will bring about so much dysfunction, and maybe it will affect generations after you, your kids, would you do it? Well, but that's the thing. The problem with sin, you don't really see the consequences right away. And it seems so harmless. I always like to think of sin as like, when you take the medicines for a specific headache or, and you have the side effects. Well, the side effects are not usually advertised. Like, they usually are advertised, they're required by law to say them. They're really, really quick. You can't even hear what they're saying. They're like, hey, you should take this because it's good for your stomach. They usually advertise the good parts of it. And that's what the enemy does. He emphasizes the good parts of it. Oh yeah, well, the Lord knows that the moment you eat of this, you will be like him. Isn't that tempting? To know exactly what's right and what's wrong, to know the evil versus the good, And when they did that, well, it says that their eyes were opened and they saw that they were naked. So the very first thing that we see them do is they said that they found some fig leaves and they covered themselves, their nakedness. There's a problem with that. Fig leaves, they dry up. So you have to go through a whole bunch of them. What God is saying here, what Genesis is saying here is, if you came to that point where you've committed a sin, trying to cover it up doesn't really work. You can't manufacture any kind of thing that will kind of take away what you just done. You can't cover that up. And that's kind of the natural inclination for you to kind of, the moment we sin, is to pull away and cover ourselves. I'm like, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Like, nothing to look at here, folks. Move on. And this is the next thing that they did, is they hid themselves. They hid themselves from the presence of God. And here's the problem with that is, can you hide yourself from God? Where can you hide yourself from God? But what this created, it created a void. It created a separation between God and men. And that's problematic, because now they can't be in the presence of God. So they say that they hid themselves, and then God was looking for them. And then the third step here, we see that God says, okay, well, where are you at? And I think in our lives, God does the same thing, where He tries to gently get to you, like, Adam, why are you running around? Have you ever gotten in a conversation with someone, then you got into an argument, and then you start to ignore them? What does that say? There's a break in that relationship. There's something in between you and God. You see, it says in Genesis 3 that they were naked and unashamed before the fall. In a sense, what it's saying here is there's nothing that was covering them from God. They didn't hide themselves. They didn't cover themselves because they weren't unashamed. But the moment they sinned, they start to experience shame and guilt. They start to experience all these things. And that created a void between God and them. And the next thing is when God confronts them with it, when God is going to come into your life and confront you with the dysfunction, the sin, and the things that are going in your life and my life, there's a tendency to start playing the blame game. Well, technically, God, if I didn't have the wife which you gave me, and then when he got to Eve, if it wasn't for the serpent who deceived me, there's always kind of like a blame game. But none of those things are actually healthy. None of those things are actually going to bring anything in your life that will bring healing and restoration. You see, if you're dealing with sin, if you're dealing with the problem in your life, if you have cancer, right? You can't just put a Band-Aid on it and say, like, I'm fine. They have to get in there. They have to get it out. Because otherwise they'll start to poison everything else. So this morning's message is not to tell you how horrible we are, but to tell you about the hope that we have. You know, because I think a lot of times people know what we stand against. Well, we're against this, homosexuals and abortionists and Hillary Clinton. Oops, never mind. That's not. Don't go there. Right? Like I'm of this political view. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. You know, like we always try to like put ourselves in different categories, trying to define ourselves. But really, what we're dealing here with is bigger than that. What we're dealing here with is something that lives in a lot of us. His name is sin. And it's a constant fight. Now, you see, God said that, okay, well, I can no longer be in close proximity with Adam because I'll consume them. We have so many instances in the Bible where people get close to the Lord and they haven't gone through the rituals, they haven't gone through a process of sanctification, a process of cleaning themselves, right? And there was no atonement for their sin. And when they come close to God, it says that God destroys them. There's fire that comes out. You can read of Uzzah. You can read of when Nadab and Abihu come close to the Lord and bring the strange fire. And it says that the fire of the Lord came and destroyed them. So God cannot dwell in the presence of sin. He consumes sin. And when we sin, when Adam did us a huge unfavor and did that, well, it caused a separation between God and man. And God says, okay, how am I gonna fix this? Because man is sinful and I cannot have him in my presence. And he institutes this whole kind of system of people coming close to him. But before they can come close to him, what they would do is they would have to go through rituals, and they would have to go through the blood of lambs and the bulls. And then there's this odd passage in there that talks about how the blood of the lamb and the blood of the bulls doesn't really take away the sin. And you're like, wait a second, but why are they doing it? Well, they're doing that because, you see, even in mess up where Adam messed up so bad, even there, God planted a seed of redemption. I want to read this verse that we find in Genesis 3, and basically talks about how even in their own brokenness, even in their sin, God puts the hope of redemption. In Genesis 3:15 says this, "And I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring, and he will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." So God puts this plan, the seed of redemption, that one day the offspring of the woman, there will be a savior that will come through the woman. He's gonna come and he's gonna bring redemption. And that's what we see what happens at the cross. At the cross, we see Jesus coming, and he is Pastor Russell talked about last time, where he talked about how Jesus had his heel bruised on the cross when he kind of pushed himself constantly to get air. He says that the enemy tried to derail the plan of God of redemption by constantly, tempting Jesus first. And when he saw that doesn't work, he went, okay, well, I'm gonna lead him towards the cross. And when he was on the cross, he says that the enemy did that, where he, in a sense, kind of inflicted a certain level of pain on Jesus. But when Jesus died, he brought in this life, he brought redemption for all of us. And he crushed the head of the enemy. And now we have his righteousness. We have his kind of everything that he did, all the work that he did on the cross is actually placed in our life, and we no longer have to deal with our messes, our problems, because he's taken them on the cross. You know what also Jesus did? When he died on the cross, on the third day, it says that he resurrected, and he crushed in the same death. When he resurrected, he crushed death itself. And that's when we sang today that, "Death, where is your sting?" Well, Jesus resurrected. He crushed not only Satan, but sin. So in the 6 minutes that I have left, what does that mean for us? Slavik, you say that, okay, he crushed the head of the enemy, and he crushed death, but I am still dealing with sin. People still do die in my life. I'm dealing with brokenness. I'm dealing with dysfunction. I'm dealing with sickness and disease. How is it that I can still deal with this when supposedly Jesus dealt with it on the cross? I thought it was over. How is it that I'm still dealing with this? Well, you see, here's what we have to understand. What Jesus did is he legislated redemption. Let me explain. In the United States government, we have three branches. We have the legislative branch that makes laws. Then we have the executive branch that basically enforces those laws. And then we have the judicial branch that interprets those laws and sees if those laws are broken. So for example, the government, or the Senate and the House of Representatives, the Congress, they would make a law. The speed limit is 60 on the freeway. When you break the law, the police force will enforce that. They will give you a ticket. But if you want to dispute that, you go to court, right? And they interpret, did you actually break the law? And what happens here is this. Jesus, he legislated freedom for all of us. On the cross, he legislated freedom, and he gave us the permission to resist the devil, and he will flee. He gave us permission to take on his righteousness. And it's Jesus' job to kind of legislate our freedom and our redemption. But it's your job, it's the church's job to enforce that. We are his hands, we are his feet, we are his mouthpiece here on earth. And if you gonna pray that God will save your friends, what God is gonna tell you is you have to go and embrace them. You're gonna have to go and preach to them. And this is what's interesting to look in the New Testament. When we look at Jesus, right? I wish that Jesus would have came and just snapped us into perfection really quick. Then I wouldn't have to deal with a broken kettle and all the other stuff that is dysfunctional in my life. I wish that God would come into our lives and just kind of make us perfect, and we would no longer have to deal with sin, brokenness, disease, But that's not how God does, because he's not just interested in you being perfect like he is. He's interested in the character that you develop along the way. He molds characters. He changes lives, and he says he becomes like one of us. He takes on a humanity like all of us. He says that now we have a priest that sympathizes with us, that felt the same temptations, that felt pain, and he knows what we went through. And that's what we see here. What Jesus has legislated, we have to enforce in our own lives. So maybe that's not what you're looking for. Maybe you thought you're just going to be perfect from now on. You've seen those people around that think that perfection is attainable. And the very fact that they claim they're perfect in itself is a lie, so they aren't. So by default, they aren't perfect. So that just proved my point. Right? Like, we constantly look for that. We constantly look for a way to kind of redeem our problems. Well, we have in Jesus, we have a way of doing that. But we're going to have to live that out. He brought redemption. He gave us the freedom and to walk in freedom. And for, we have verses that says, for freedom Christ has set us free. And then we have verses that says, walk in the Spirit and you'll no longer fulfill the desires of the flesh. So this morning, how do you walk in freedom? By doing what God has called us to do. By reading his word. By constantly looking for holiness. By constantly looking for his presence in our life. I want to close with this verse, and we have this powerful kind of illustration the Apostle Paul gives us in Ephesians 6:10. He says that we have to put on the whole armor of God. And the way you're gonna keep you're gonna stand your ground is to put on all these things. And it goes on to say this, finally, a final word, brothers, be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the whole armor of God so that you'll be able to stand firm against all the strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of unseen world, against mighty powers of the dark world, against evil spirits of the heavenly places. Therefore, put on every single piece of armor of God, so you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then after the battle, you will still be firm, be standing firm. Stand your ground, putting on the belt of truth, the body of armor of God's righteousness. For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news, so that you will be fully prepared. In addition to all of these, hold up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the enemy. Put on the salvation. Put on salvation as your helmet, and take up the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray in the Spirit at all times, on every occasion. Stay alert and be persistent in every prayer for all believers everywhere. Put on the full armor of God. Put on the belt of truth. You won't go to Iraq in your flip-flops and shorts thinking you're fine. And if you go to Iraq and you try to find some armor, most likely it's not gonna fit. And you'll be an extremely odd sight to see when you have a whole bunch of stuff that you put on from other people that you saw, maybe dead people that you kind of found, maybe dead soldiers, and you try to put on a helmet that doesn't really fit. No, you see, if you wanna fight the good fight, when there's no war, you're gonna have to prepare yourself. You're gonna have to put on the belt of truth, the bulletproof vest of righteousness of Jesus, the helmet of salvation. You know, put on the shoes of the gospel of peace. So this morning, I encourage you that in your downtime, in your practice, that you search after Him, that you learn how to fight, that you put on the whole armor of God, and you take the sacrifice that Jesus has given us, and you take the call of duty that God has placed in your life to stand up for the church and to resist the devil and to flee from passions that will get into, in your life, will start to mess that up. And I hope that we learn from Adam. I hope that we learn from all these other people that came before us, that set an example of what to do and what not to do.